My name is Catherine, and I'm 78 years old. I've lived a long life, not always happy, not always peaceful, but full of lessons. I was once the woman everyone looked up to in my community, a faithful wife, a devoted mother, the pastor's wife who always had a kind smile, a plate of food ready for anyone in need, and a front row seat every Sunday morning. People thought I had the perfect life, but what they didn't know, what no one ever knew, is that behind that smile was a storm I hid for over 2 decades, a storm I was told to ignore, a truth I was forced to bury, and a pain that nearly destroyed me from the inside out. You see, my husband wasn't just a man, he was the man, our community's spiritual leader, our children's role model, the man who prayed for others and preached about honesty, purity, and love. And yet, for 20 long years, he had a secret that I was never allowed to share. An affair one I discovered early in our marriage, and was ordered to keep silent about. Today, I'm not here to protect his image. I'm not here to keep church politics intact or pretend that my life was something it wasn't. I'm here because the silence almost killed me. And if there's even one woman out there listening, one who feels like she's trapped in a lie that's not even hers, then maybe my voice can help her find hers. It's taken me years to get to this point. I used to believe speaking out was betrayal, that silence was noble. But now I know better. I know that secrets can become prisons, and that truth, even when painful, is the only path to real peace. This is my story told with trembling hands, tearful eyes, but finally, with a free heart. Let me take you back to where it all began. I first met Richard in 1967. I was a bright-eyed girl of 20, working at the church library and singing in the choir. He was 27, tall, well-spoken, and freshly ordained. He had a presence about him, not just in the way he spoke, but in how people leaned in when he walked by. He had the charisma of a leader, and the charm of someone who always knew the right thing to say. To me, he was magnetic. Our courtship was quick, just over 6 months. The church approved. My parents were thrilled. "You're marrying a man of God," my mother would whisper, squeezing my hand. "You'll be safe with him." And I believed that. With all my heart, we got married in a small chapel, surrounded by people who said we were destined for a life of service and blessing. I had dreams of a home filled with laughter, dinners after Sunday sermons, and children who would grow up watching their parents love each other through it all. I thought God had given me a perfect love story at first. Everything seemed just right. Richard was attentive. He'd pray with me at night, read scripture in the mornings, and even leave little notes in my Bible when he traveled for church duties. The congregation loved us. People brought us pies after service. We were invited to every birthday, every wedding, every baby dedication. Little cracks began to show. Things so small at first I dismissed them. He started coming home late from counseling sessions. He began traveling more frequently. The warmth in his words began to cool, replaced by curt replies and sighs. And yet, every Sunday he stood in front of that pulpit, preaching about love, commitment, and truth. I tried not to question it. After all, who was I to doubt a man of God? Still, I noticed how he smiled a little too long at a certain choir member, how he began locking his study door, how he took more private calls in the middle of the night. My heart started whispering warnings, but my mind and my faith kept shushing them. Back then, I was taught that marriage was forever, that submission was strength, that a wife's role was to keep peace in the home, to lift her husband up, and to trust him, especially if he was a pastor. So, I did. I trusted. And when I stumbled upon the first clue, a handwritten letter folded inside one of his sermon notes, I froze. It wasn't just affectionate, it was intimate. It wasn't from a congregant, it was from her, someone I knew, someone who sat 2 rows behind me in church every Sunday. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at that letter for over an hour, my hands trembling so badly I couldn't fold it back. I remember thinking, maybe it's just emotional. Maybe it's not physical. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. That night, I asked him gently. I didn't accuse him. I simply asked, "Is there something you want to tell me?" He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize either. He just looked at me, cold and composed, and said, "If you love me, you won't tell anyone. You'll protect this family. You'll protect this church." And in that moment, my voice disappeared. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But I nodded. I swallowed the truth and locked it inside me like a secret I didn't want but couldn't escape. I told myself it was a mistake, that it would end, that he'd come back to me fully. I begged God to fix it. I fasted, I prayed, I carried on, smiling, serving, cooking, hugging, pretending. But the truth is, that night was the beginning of the end of the woman I used to be. It didn't end there, that affair. It continued, quietly, cruelly, and right under everyone's nose, and I kept silent. Not because I was weak, but because I had been taught that silence was noble, that airing your pain was shameful, that a wife's greatest strength was her ability to endure. And so, I endured. This was just the beginning of a life that would teach me the difference between obedience and oppression, and the high cost of protecting someone else's life. There are moments that freeze in your memory, not because they're beautiful, but because they shatter everything you thought you knew. For me, that moment came on a humid Thursday afternoon, when I opened a drawer I wasn't supposed to, and the truth jumped out like a ghost I could no longer ignore. I wasn't snooping. At least, that's what I told myself. I had been looking for Charles's church schedule so I could organize a last-minute dinner for the deacons. He always kept it in his study, in a small leather-bound notebook inside the bottom drawer of his desk. But when I pulled the drawer open, the notebook wasn't there. Instead, there was a thin manila envelope, slightly worn and unmarked. Something told me not to touch it, but curiosity and dread have a strange way of holding hands, and before I even knew what I was doing, I had pulled it out and opened it. Inside were photographs, not of family, not of church events. No. They were photos of Charles, my husband, sitting at a park bench, holding hands with a woman I had never seen before. In another photo, they were laughing. In another, her head rested on his shoulder. But the one that stopped my breath cold was the one where they were kissing full on the lips. In broad daylight, I dropped the photos like they burned my fingers. My knees buckled, and I sat right there on the floor of his office, gasping for air like I had forgotten how to breathe. My heart pounded so loud I thought I might faint. I felt sick, betrayed, but most of all, I felt stupid. How long had this been going on? Who was she? Why would he keep these? Was it arrogance, a trophy, a sick keepsake? I wanted to scream, to tear them up, to drive to wherever he was and demand answers, but I didn't think. I put them back. Every last one. I slid the envelope exactly where I found it and closed the drawer. I sat there in silence for what must have been over an hour. My hands trembled. My mouth went dry. The weight of 20 years of denial came crashing down like a collapsing building, and I was buried under it. When Charles came home later that evening, I acted like nothing had happened. I served him dinner. I listened to his sermon plans. I kissed him goodnight, and I hated myself for it, but I needed time to think, time to decide what to do, and in truth, time to build the courage I never thought I'd need. The next morning, I watched him get dressed like he always did. I watched him put on his white collar, the symbol of his calling. The irony nearly made me laugh. I almost wanted to ask him, "Do you pray with her too?" But the words stayed lodged in my throat. I started paying closer attention after that day. I tracked his movements. I took note of the times he left and the excuses he gave. I listened for changes in his voice, new colognes, secret phone calls. I found text messages once, hidden under a different contact name, flirty, coded, but clear enough. It confirmed everything, but I still didn't confront him. You might wonder why. Why I didn't explode. Why I didn't pack my bags. Why I didn't march into church and expose him for what he was. Because I was afraid, not of him, but of the fallout, of what it would mean for the church, for our children, for my identity. I wasn't just a wife, I was his wife, the pastor's wife, the woman others came to for comfort and guidance. What would happen to me if I was no longer that? And maybe, just maybe, part of me still loved him. Or maybe I loved the memory of him. The man I married. The one who made me feel seen and safe once upon a time. A week after I found the photos, I asked him, gently, who Anna was. He didn't flinch. He smiled, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "She's someone from the counseling ministry." "Why do you ask?" I nodded. "No reason." I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and cried harder than I ever had before. Not because of the lie. I expected that. But because of how easy it was for him. How quickly the truth vanished behind his teeth. That was the moment I knew this affair wasn't new. It had history, weight, familiarity, and I had been living inside the lie for longer than I could bear to admit. I still hadn't confronted him. Not fully. Not yet. But from that day on, the truth was no longer a question. It was a wound I carried in silence, a secret I would be forced to hold for 20 long years. Once I knew the truth, the next challenge was enduring the lies. It's strange how knowing something doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it chains you tighter. I had the evidence. I had the ache. But what I didn't have was the voice to say, I know. I tried once. Just once. That was a quiet evening, after dinner. The children were gone, the dishes were done, and Charles was reading one of his theology books like nothing was wrong with the world. I sat beside him, hands folded in my lap, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Charles, I began, softly, can I ask you something? He didn't even look up. Of course, dear, if you were ever tempted to be close to someone who wasn't me, would you tell me? He paused, slowly closed the book. He looked at me with those practiced, calm eyes that he used in counseling sessions. Where is this coming from? I shrugged, just wondering. He smiled, that half smile that always made me feel small when it wasn't sincere. Temptation is a part of life. Even pastors are human. But acting on it, that's where discipline comes in. You know that. Why would you even ask something like that? And there it was, a question answered with a question designed to shift the guilt onto me. I nodded. I was just thinking, that's all. He went back to reading, and I went back to silence. From then on, the unspoken became a third presence in our home. It sat between us at dinner. It crawled into bed with us. It hovered over the church pews, where I smiled politely at people who had no idea that my world was built on a lie. Charles began to justify his absences more boldly. The ministry is growing, he'd say. People need more one-on-one prayer sessions. Anna became a frequent name, always in the context of helping the women's group or leading a worship project. And every time he mentioned her, I watched his face for any sign of shame. There was none. Sometimes, I wondered if he wanted me to know. If keeping it a secret wasn't just about guilt, but control. As long as I never said anything, he had power, not just over me, but over the image he had so carefully crafted. One night, I found him in the kitchen making a late snack. He was humming. He only hummed when he was happy. I leaned against the doorway and asked, "What makes you happiest these days?" He looked up, startled. "What kind of question is that?" "I'm just curious. Is it preaching the kids, us?" He studied me for a long moment. "Serving God makes me happy." "Why?" I didn't answer. I just walked back to the bedroom and cried into my pillow, because I knew that wasn't true. Not anymore. As time went on, his behavior shifted. He grew bolder, coming home later, checking his phone constantly, smiling when he read messages he didn't share with me, but he still made time for church, still led prayer meetings, still touched my back gently when we greeted guests after Sunday services. To the outside world, we were untouchable, but inside, I was withering. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream, to break plates, to call Anna and tell her she could have him, as long as she knew who she was really dealing with. But I didn't. Why? Because I was afraid of becoming the villain in a story. I didn't write the pastor's wife who couldn't keep her marriage together, the emotional one, the woman who let jealousy get the best of her. Because in churches like ours, it's not always the man who gets blamed. It's the woman who dares to say what no one wants to hear. So I stayed silent. I became an actress, my greatest performance. The devoted wife. I hosted women's brunches. I led Bible studies. I counseled younger women on how to pray through the storm. Oh, the irony. I knew every verse about forgiveness, about patience, about being slow to anger, and I weaponized them against myself. Charles never confessed. Not once, but every time I saw him delete a message, or linger too long after church, I saw his guilt. Not in his words. Never that. But in the way he avoided my eyes. When I asked about his day, I lived that way for years, carrying his secret like a coffin on my back, until the weight began to crush me. But I still couldn't let go, because breaking the silence meant breaking the church, and I wasn't ready to be the woman who destroyed a ministry, even if the ministry had already destroyed me. People often say the pastor's wife is one of the strongest women in the church. She's expected to be graceful under pressure, patient without fail, and endlessly supportive, always with a smile. And for 20 years, I wore that role like a costume sewn from lies, stitched together with every silent tear I cried behind closed doors. To the congregation. I was Sister Evelyn, kind, faithful, dependable. I was the woman who hugged widows, prayed over the sick, baked for church fundraisers, and taught little girls about being a Proverbs 31 woman. I was on every women's ministry committee, organized every holiday dinner, and never once raised my voice or showed a sign of weakness. But inside, I was a ghost of the woman I used to be. You see, living with a secret that big, knowing your husband is having an affair and choosing not to speak, doesn't just break your heart, it divides your soul. I had to split myself in two, the version the world saw, and the version I saw in the mirror, every night. The public version of me smiled through his sermons, nodded when he praised marriage, clapped when he quoted scripture about faithfulness. I would sit there beside him, holding his hand, pretending I didn't feel the sting of hypocrisy. Every sermon about honesty, about integrity, about commitment. It felt like daggers disguised as verses. And yet, I smiled, because I had to. The private version of me was hollow. I walked through our house like a stranger. I kept my grief quiet, even around our children, because I didn't want them to lose respect for their father, or worse, blame me. I cooked his meals, washed his clothes, and watched him get ready for late meetings without ever asking where he was really going. I remember one day in particular, a women's retreat at a local lodge. I had been asked to give a talk on faith through adversity. I stood in front of 60 women, talking about job, about suffering with purpose, about finding strength in trials. They cried. They thanked me. One even told me I was the strongest woman she'd ever met. But the truth, I had just spent the entire night crying on the bathroom floor. After accidentally reading a text from Anna that said, "Thank you for last night," I needed that. I still don't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that I had to hide it so well that no one even suspected. The hardest part was church. Sunday mornings were torture in disguise. I had to sit through praise and worship with my hands raised high, knowing my heart was in pieces. I had to greet people at the door with warmth while wondering if the woman standing in the back row was her. And every time Charles took the pulpit and spoke about morality, I had to fight the urge to scream, to stand up and shout, "You're not who they think you are." But I didn't, because the church wasn't just our workplace, it was our home, our community, our identity. Exposing him would mean tearing apart everything we'd built, and despite everything, part of me still loved him. Or maybe I loved the idea of him, the one I married, not the one he became. There were times I tried to find solace. I poured myself into service. I spent extra hours mentoring young women, telling them to wait for God's best, all while knowing I had settled for less than God ever intended. I taught purity and trust and forgiveness words I no longer believed applied to me. I became the queen of compartmentalization. I buried my pain beneath casseroles, behind smiles, inside prayer journals no one would ever read. But it wasn't sustainable. I began losing pieces of myself, not all at once, but little by little. I stopped singing around the house. I stopped writing. I stopped laughing. My eyes grew tired, my back more hunched. Friends asked if I was okay, and I always said the same thing, just tired. Ministry keeps us busy. It became easier to lie than to tell the truth, because the truth would unravel everything. And here's the cruel irony. The more I played the part of the perfect pastor's wife, the more praise I received. She's so composed. She's such a role model. You can see how much she loves the Lord. No one saw that I was dying inside. And Charles, he thrived in the duality. He got to keep his marriage, his mistress, his ministry, and no one ever questioned it, because I was the perfect cover, the faithful wife, the silenced woman, the shield behind which he hid his sin. Living a double life doesn't just rob you of happiness, it robs you of truth. And without truth, even your faith begins to feel like fiction. But I stayed, because I didn't know how to be anything else. Not yet. I didn't know her name at first. All I knew was that she existed, not as a rumor, not as a suspicion, but as a real woman with a real place in my husband's life. And somehow, even before I saw her face, I hated her. Not because she had stolen him, but because he gave himself to her, freely, consistently, secretly. Her name was Anna, a soft, sweet-sounding name, the kind of name that didn't sound dangerous, but oh, she was. I first saw her at a church event. She wasn't a member of our congregation, but she came to help organize a regional youth gathering. I remember she had this air about her, polished, confident, the kind of woman who knew exactly how to make a room look at her without trying too hard. She was at least 10 years younger than Charles, maybe more, blonde, tall, with a laugh that floated across the room like perfume. I remember watching her touch Charles's arm when she spoke to him, too familiar, too often. He didn't flinch. In fact, he smiled. That smile gutted me. At the time, I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things, but my stomach twisted every time she was near. Something about the way she leaned in when he talked, the way she glanced at me like I was just a shadow in the background. She wasn't afraid of me. That's when I knew she didn't have to be, because Charles had already made his choice. Over time, I saw her more often. At conferences, at retreats. Sometimes she'd show up at our Sunday services, sitting quietly near the back, taking notes. Once, I caught Charles glancing her way midst the men. It was subtle, but not subtle enough for me to miss. And she smiled. A smile that said, I know something you don't. But I did know. What I didn't know was how to compete with someone he had already given his heart to. Anna was everything I wasn't anymore. She was youthful, free-spirited. She didn't know the weight of raising children, the exhaustion of ministry behind closed doors, the burden of holding together a man falling apart inside. She had the best of Charles, the version of him that I hadn't seen in years. The charming, attentive, passionate man who once brought me flowers just because he brought her flowers now. I found a card once in his glove compartment. It said, "You're my peace. Thank you for seeing me." It wasn't addressed to anyone, but I knew I wanted to confront her, to walk right up and say, "You can have him, but you'll never have the years I gave him, the scars, the prayers, the sacrifices." But what would that change? She already had what I'd lost, his attention. What cut the deepest wasn't that she was younger or prettier. It was that he treated her with tenderness, with intention. I overheard a voicemail once, his voice soft, almost boyish. "I miss you. I hate sleeping alone." He hadn't said that to me in over a decade. I began comparing myself to her in ways that felt poisonous. I'd stand in front of the mirror and tug at my wrinkles, wonder if I should dye my hair again, maybe buy new clothes. But no amount of makeup could erase the years of betrayal etched into my face. And worst of all, I hated that I was blaming myself, like somehow I had failed to keep him interested, as if it were my fault that he broke his vows. But I hadn't changed. I had grown. I had loved him through his hardest seasons. I had stood by him when the church struggled, when he questioned his calling, when he lost his temper over things he wouldn't even remember. I had prayed for him when he didn't deserve it, and still, he chose her, not because she was better, but because she was new, untouched by time, untethered to his past. But what neither of them realized was that secrets have a way of decaying everything they touch, and no matter how bright their stolen moments seemed, they were built on shadows, lies, a rotting foundation. I often imagined what their conversations were like. Did he lie to her the way he lied to me? Did he make promises he had no intention of keeping? Or worse, did he tell her the truth and make me the villain? Sometimes I dreamed of leaving him. I'd picture myself packing a suitcase, walking out the door, and never looking back. But I'd look at our home, at the family portraits on the wall, and I'd feel paralyzed, because if I left, I'd lose everything, and if I stayed, I'd keep losing myself. So I stayed silent. I went through the motions. I smiled at her when I had to. I cooked dinner for him knowing where he had been the night before. I prayed prayers I didn't believe in anymore, and every night I asked God the same question: why her? Why not me? But the heavens were quiet, and so was I. When you're married to a man like Charles, a pastor, a leader, a symbol, you begin to realize something heartbreaking. The church will always come before the marriage, and when that man has something to hide, the church becomes a convenient shield, a wall to protect the image, the reputation, the illusion. But behind that wall, the truth suffocates. After I accepted quietly that Charles had chosen another woman, I expected him to be discreet, to at least try to limit the damage. But no. He doubled down on his pastoral presence. He preached harder, prayed louder, smiled wider. He buried his guilt beneath good deeds, and the congregation, they adored him more than ever. Pastor Charles is so anointed. He's a man of such integrity. I wish my husband could be more like him. Each compliment felt like a knife. And me. I stood beside him, clapping, nodding, pretending, because if I exposed him, I wouldn't just ruin our marriage, I'd bring down the entire church, the elders, the youth group, the women's ministry, the tithes, the faith of dozens of families who believed he was sent by God. I carried that burden alone. It wasn't just a fear of what people would think, it was deeper, more sinister. We'd built this church together. From nothing. We'd held prayer meetings in our living room when we couldn't afford rent for a space. I had baked for every fundraiser, led worship when our choir quit, counseled broken couples while hiding my own brokenness. This place was my life's work too. But if the truth came out, none of that would matter. The narrative would be simple. She's bitter, she's jealous, she's trying to ruin a good man. Because people don't want their heroes to be flawed. They'd rather believe the wife is unstable than admit their pastor is living a lie. And Charles knew that. He used it once. I suggested we take a break from ministry, a sabbatical, a reset. He looked at me like I'd just cursed in church. We're at the height of our calling, he said. What kind of message would that send? That we're weak? No, Charles, not we, you. But I didn't say that, because every time I tried to put our marriage first, he reminded me of our responsibility to the flock. The church needed us. The community depended on us. Our marriage, our truth, those were secondary. He told me, the devil is always looking for a way in. If we start doubting each other, if we bring personal drama into the pulpit, Satan wins. Imagine that, using scripture to protect adultery. And I let him, because I had been trained to serve not just God, but my husband's ministry. I had been taught that submission was holy, that endurance was noble, that silence was strength. So I wrapped myself in false righteousness and kept quiet. I became the protector of the church's illusion. One Sunday, during communion, I watched Charles hand the bread and cup to people with such sincerity. Tears filled their eyes as he spoke about sacrifice and covenant. And I sat there thinking, you're breaking your covenant every single week. Every time you hold her hand, you break another piece of mine. But who would believe me? Not the board, not the choir director who thought Charles could walk on water, not the congregation that saw him as a father figure, and certainly not the other pastors, many of whom probably had secrets of their own. So I protected him, protected the church. I even lied for him. When someone mentioned seeing Charles at a hotel in another town, I laughed it off. Oh, he was visiting a sick member in that area. When Anna's name came up during women's fellowship, I smiled and said, she's been such a blessing to the youth group. Each lie was a little death. But I couldn't let the truth out, because the truth would destroy everything we had spent decades building. And in ministry, destruction, even for a just cause, is rarely forgiven. The few times I hinted at our troubles in private conversations, I was met with well-meaning but dismissive responses. Marriage takes work. Have you prayed about it? Don't let Satan sow doubt. So I stopped hinting. I locked it all away. At night, I'd sit by our window and whisper to God, why are you letting this happen? And always, silence. Or worse, sermons that made me feel like it was my job to carry this, that my suffering was some kind of holy endurance. But I wasn't holy. I was tired, broken, angry, and worst of all, invisible, because in trying to protect the church, I had abandoned the woman I used to be. Pain doesn't always announce itself with screams. Sometimes it shows up quietly, in the way you forget to smile, in the weight you carry in your chest when you wake up, in the cracks in your voice when someone asks if you're okay, and you say, I'm fine. For years, I told myself I was strong, that God had given me endurance, that bearing this burden, this secret, was a kind of spiritual offering. But what I didn't realize was how slowly I was dying on the inside. One day at a time. It started small. I stopped sleeping through the night. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, heart pounding, my mind racing with images of Charles with her. My body would shake, even though the room was warm. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, asking myself the same questions over and over. Why am I still here? What am I waiting for? What happened to the woman I used to be? The exhaustion seeped into everything. I forgot appointments, burned dinner, cried in the shower where no one could hear me. Some days I didn't even want to get out of bed, not because I was lazy, but because I couldn't find the reason to move anymore. My purpose, being a wife, a helper, a ministry partner, had turned into a performance. A lie. And deep down, I knew it was killing me. I began losing weight. At first, I was grateful. Friends complimented me. You look amazing, Evelyn, they'd say. But the truth was, I wasn't eating. I'd push food around my plate at dinner, smile politely, and make excuses. My body was in survival mode, and I didn't even notice. I stopped singing. For years, music had been my outlet. I used to sing hymns while I cooked, hum softly during my morning devotions. But one day I caught myself in the kitchen, silent. The radio was on, but my heart wasn't in it. I turned it off. Why sing when you feel like you've lost your voice? And then came the panic attacks. The first one hit me in the middle of a service. Charles was preaching about forgiveness, of all things, and I felt the room spin. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. I excused myself, barely making it to the restroom before collapsing against the sink. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were tired, hollow. Her lips trembled with the weight of unshed truths. Whispered to my reflection, "This can't be my life." But it was. The toll wasn't just emotional. My body began breaking down in ways I couldn't control. My doctor said it was stress. My blood pressure spiked. I developed migraines that lasted for days. I was prescribed medication, but what I needed wasn't pills, it was peace. And peace was nowhere to be found in that house, in that marriage, in that lie. I became short-tempered, detached. At church, I still smiled, but at home, I was a shell. I stopped talking, unless I had to. I moved through the house like a ghost. Even the joy of being a mother, a grandmother, it dulled. I felt ashamed of how numb I had become, how disconnected, like my soul was slowly retreating, one step at a time. And through it all, Charles never noticed. Or maybe he did, and chose not to care. He was too busy juggling sermons and secrets, too consumed with maintaining his image, too comfortable with the lie we were living to ask why his wife no longer laughed, no longer touched him, no longer looked him in the eye. I began journaling again, something I hadn't done since our early days of marriage. Not prayer journals, not ministry notes, just raw, unfiltered emotion. Page after page of things I couldn't say out loud. Confessions of pain, anger, confusion. Sometimes I'd write letters to the woman I used to be. "Dear Evelyn," I'd begin. "Where did you go? Please come back." The worst part of carrying this weight wasn't the loneliness, it was the feeling that no one would believe me if I spoke, that people would rally around Charles, call me bitter, say I was exaggerating, that my pain would be dismissed as drama. So I stayed quiet, and the silence cost me more than my voice. It cost me my health, my joy, my connection with God, because how could I pray to a God who let me suffer for so long in secret? I know now that wasn't fair. God didn't cause this. But at the time, I couldn't separate my faith from my pain. They had become intertwined, and the more I suffered, the more distant he felt. I was breaking body, mind, and spirit. And still, I smiled. Still, I served. Still, I stayed. Because even when you're drowning, sometimes it's easier to sink quietly than scream for help, especially when no one's listening. If there's one part of this entire journey that still brings a lump to my throat, it's what my children never knew. Or maybe what they weren't allowed to know, because I chose that. I chose to protect them from the truth. I thought I was sparing them, but in hindsight, I wonder if I was only helping the lie grow stronger by keeping them in the dark. Charles and I had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, all grown now, all with lives of their own. When they were young, we were the perfect Christian family, matching outfits for church, coordinated holiday dinners, family devotionals around the table. People admired us, envied us. Even they thought we had it all. And for a while, I believed it too. Our children were the light of my life. Their laughter filled the hallways. Their questions about God and the world kept my heart soft. When things between Charles and me began to shift, when the warmth faded, when the lies began, it was my children who kept me grounded. I'd look at them and tell myself, "You can't fall apart. They need you whole." So I smiled. I kept birthdays joyful, Christmas magical. I never let them see me cry, never let my voice quiver. When Charles missed dinners or came home late, I covered for him. Church emergency, last-minute meeting. Someone needed prayer. They accepted those explanations, because they trusted him, because I taught them to. And that's what haunts me. I taught them to see him as a good man, a godly man, even when I knew better. I remember one night when our youngest Sarah must have been 14 or 15. She came into my room late at night, eyes wide, and asked, "Mom, do you think Daddy loves you?" It hit me like a slap. "Of course he does," I said too quickly. "Why would you ask that?" She shrugged. "He just seems distant. He doesn't smile at you like he used to." I sat on the bed beside her and smoothed her hair. Marriage changes as people grow older, but love doesn't go away. Sometimes, it just gets quieter. I lied to her face, and I hated myself for it. But what was I supposed to say? He's in love with another woman. He betrayed his vows and I'm too afraid to leave. No, I couldn't shatter her image of her father. I wouldn't be the one to poison her heart. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that shielding them from the ugly truth was a form of love. And maybe it was. But secrets don't just stay hidden, they grow roots. And sometimes, those roots twist around everything, choking the light out of a family. As the kids got older, they began to notice more. My smiles looked forced. My energy waned. Charles and I barely spoke at home. Still, they never questioned it, or if they did, they never asked. Perhaps they were afraid to know the truth. Or maybe they'd learned, like I had, that pretending is easier than facing what's real. One time, during a family barbecue, Charles received a text and walked off to take the call. He didn't come back for nearly half an hour. I watched my oldest son Daniel glance toward the trees where his father had disappeared, his brow furrowed, and for a second, I thought he might ask me something, but he didn't. He just turned back to the grill and changed the subject. That's the thing about silence in a family. It becomes a language, and we all spoke it fluently. I wonder now what it would have been like if I had told them the truth. If I had said, "Your father betrayed me. He's not the man you think he is." Would they have believed me? Or would they have resented me for destroying their hero? I didn't want to risk it. I couldn't bear to lose their love too. But the silence created distance, emotional walls. I see it in the way they call less, visit less, keep things surface level. I wonder if they sensed that something was wrong all along. If they're waiting for me to tell them what really happened. Maybe one day I will, because now, as a grandmother, I see the danger of secrets passed through generations. I watch my daughter raise her children, and I pray that they grow up in truth, not illusion. I hope she teaches them that love doesn't mean silence, that strength isn't measured by how long you can endure pain, but by the courage to face it. I kept my children in the dark because I thought it was kinda. But now, I know truth, even when painful, is never cruel. Hiding the truth, on the other hand, can leave a legacy of confusion and mistrust. If I could go back, I'd still protect them, but I'd also prepare them. I'd help them understand that people are flawed, even those we love the most. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. That betrayal doesn't define the betrayed. What my children never knew shaped them more than I realized, and what I never said shaped me into someone I barely recognized. But it's not too late to speak. Even now, after 20 years of carrying a truth so heavy, it warped the very shape of my soul. Something inside me finally snapped. It didn't happen in a storm of rage, like I used to imagine. I didn't shout, throw dishes, or write a dramatic letter. No, it came on a quiet Tuesday morning, with the sound of birds chirping through the window and sunlight creeping across our worn kitchen floor. That was the day I finally stopped lying to myself and to everyone else. I had woken up earlier than usual. Charles was already gone. No note, no message, no mention of where he was headed the night before. Just an empty side of the bed and the faint scent of cologne that no longer stirred anything in me but sorrow. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the imprint his body had left in the sheets, and I realized I was done pretending. I walked to the mirror and looked at myself long and hard. I was 68 years old. My once rosy cheeks had faded. My eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but there was something else, a flicker of resolve, a whisper that said, "Enough." The first person I told was my daughter. We met at a small coffee shop near her work. She was busy, as usual, always rushing, always juggling too much, but when I told her I needed to speak, just the two of us, she carved out the time. We sat at a corner table, warm drinks in hand, and I said it, "Your father has been unfaithful." For over 20 years, the words felt foreign in my mouth, like I was reading from someone else's story, but they were mine, all mine. She blinked, stunned, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. She asked if I was sure. I told her about Anna, about the texts, the lies, the nights he never came home, about the sermons that became theater, and the marriage that had become a cage. She didn't speak for a long time. When she did, her voice trembled. "Why didn't you ever tell me, Mom?" And there it was, the ache I'd feared most. "I wanted to protect you," I said softly. "I didn't want to break your image of him, of us, I thought it was better if you believed in the family. We used to be, she wiped her eyes and whispered, but I would have protected you. Those words broke something open in me. All these years, I thought silence was my shield, that by keeping the truth hidden, I was strong, noble. But in that moment, I saw what I had really done. I had kept my children from the truth, but also from knowing me. The real me, the broken, betrayed, resilient me. That same afternoon, I told my sons, separately, in different conversations, but the message was the same. Their reactions varied: disbelief, anger, sadness, but not once did they blame me. Not once did they question my right to speak after all this time. Then came the moment I had dreaded most, telling the church. I didn't do it from the pulpit. I didn't want drama or scandal. I went to the board, the elders, the trustees, the people Charles had served alongside for decades. I requested a private meeting. I told them everything. Some of them sat in silence. Others shifted uncomfortably. One asked me if I was sure I wanted to destroy his reputation. I looked him in the eye and said, I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply refusing to lie anymore. To my surprise, a few of the women cried. One of them, a pastor's wife herself, reached across the table and held my hand. You are so brave, she whispered. And for the first time in decades, I believed it. Charles, of course, was furious. He accused me of betrayal, of ruining the ministry, of seeking revenge, but I stood firm. I told him, you made your choices. I've just stopped covering for them. He tried to manipulate me, twist the narrative, claim he'd changed, but it was too late. The truth was out, and it had already begun its healing work. People left the church, others stayed. Some rallied around Charles, others rallied around me. The congregation fractured, but the truth had finally taken root, and that, I decided, was worth any fallout. I moved out 6 weeks later, into a small rental home with yellow curtains and creaky floors and the sweetest garden in the back. It was mine. Every corner, every crack, every breath of air, it was mine. And in that little home, I found peace. I began writing again. I started singing again. I even took a watercolor class at the local community center. For the first time in years, I could look at myself and feel proud, not for pretending, not for surviving, but for finally speaking. And though I lost so much in the process, a marriage, a ministry, a version of my life, I gained something priceless myself. When the truth finally breaks free, it doesn't bring instant peace, it brings chaos. After years of silence, the truth doesn't settle in quietly, it explodes. And I wasn't prepared for how loud it would be. In the weeks following my confession, my world split into two: the life I had lived for decades, and the life I was just beginning to reclaim. The fallout came fast. People whispered. Some stared. Others crossed the street to avoid me. There were phone calls that began with sympathy and ended in judgment. We're praying for you, they'd say. But their tone made it clear, their prayers weren't for my healing, but for my repentance. As if I were the one who had sinned by finally telling the truth. But for every judgmental glare, there was someone who pulled me aside to say, thank you for your courage. Women I had sat beside for years, women who had never spoken a word beyond pleasantries, suddenly opened up. Confessions poured out like water from a burst dam. My husband had an affair too. I never told anyone. I thought I was the only one suffering in silence. I wish I had your strength. And I realized something I hadn't expected. My truth was freeing others too. That gave me strength on the days when the loss felt overwhelming. Because I did lose a lot, Charles. And I filed for separation first, then divorce. He refused to take accountability publicly, spinning stories to whoever would listen. Some people believed him. Others didn't. But I stopped caring about convincing anyone. My truth didn't require approval. Only my own integrity. The house we had shared for nearly 40 years became his. I didn't fight for it. I didn't want it. Too many ghosts lived there with me. I took only what I needed and left the rest. I remember walking out that door with one suitcase and a deep exhale, the kind you only take when the weight you've carried finally lifts. At first, the loneliness was loud. I had spent decades sharing every meal, every calendar, every Sunday, with a man who, for all his failings, was familiar. The absence of routine felt disorienting. Some nights, I sat at my tiny kitchen table and cried, not because I missed him, but because I had missed myself for so long. I didn't know how to sit in silence with her. But then the freedom began to bloom. I started waking up with no one to impress, no mask to wear. I could eat what I wanted, sleep when I needed, decorate the living room with colors I liked. I found a used bookstore 2 blocks away and lost hours among the shelves. I reconnected with old friends, ones Charles hadn't approved of, or who had drifted away during the church years. I began therapy. For the first time in my life, I sat across from someone whose job was to listen, not to fix, not to preach, not to guilt me back into silence, but to help me understand me. The sessions were hard. I cried more than I spoke in the beginning, but each tear felt like a cleansing, a washing away of years of repression, and something beautiful started to happen. I stopped blaming myself, stopped replaying the what-ifs and if-onlys. I began seeing Charles not as a monster, but as a man who made selfish choices, who used faith as a weapon, who hurt people while hiding behind scripture. And I began seeing myself not as a victim, but as a survivor, a woman who endured, but also escaped. My children took time to adjust. There were awkward visits, emotional phone calls, uncomfortable truths to unravel, but slowly, we started rebuilding. I became closer to my daughter than I had ever been. She called me one night and said, "Mom, I don't know how you did it, but I'm proud of you." That meant more than she ever knew. The church, of course, moved on. Charles stepped down eventually, quietly, no scandal, no apology, just a polite transition into retirement. He and Anna, yes, they're still together, now attend a different congregation. I see them occasionally at community events. We don't speak, but when our eyes meet, I no longer look away, because I have nothing to hide. He does. The aftermath wasn't neat, it wasn't simple. Healing isn't linear. But in the ashes of everything I lost, I found a kind of freedom I didn't know was possible at my age. I learned that sometimes, starting over in your 60s is the bravest thing a woman can do. I planted flowers outside my new home, red ones, bright, loud, unapologetic. They bloom now like I do, slowly, defiantly, beautifully. If you're listening to my story right now, I want to speak directly to you, not as a stranger, not even as a grandmother, but as a woman who knows the weight of secrets, a woman who has lived in silence for too long. A woman who almost lost herself in the name of love, loyalty, and religion. Let me tell you this, you are not alone. There are countless women sitting in church pews, cooking dinner, raising children, smiling through pain, all while hiding truths that are too heavy to speak out loud. Women like I was. Women who believe that if they just endure a little longer, if they just pray a little harder, things will get better. But here's the truth. I wish someone had told me sooner. Endurance without truth is not strength, it's imprisonment. For 20 years, I believed that keeping his affair a secret was the Christian thing to do. I thought my silence was protecting my marriage, my children, and the church. But all it really did was protect his image and destroy me, piece by piece. And I want you to know, you don't have to live like that. You have the right to speak. You have the right to be heard. You have the right to heal. Your pain is valid. Your voice matters. And no one has the right to demand your silence in exchange for your dignity. To the woman who feels trapped in a marriage that's only whole on the outside, I see you. To the woman who's hiding his betrayal because you're afraid of what your community will say, I understand you. To the woman who thinks she's too old to start over, too tired to fight for herself, too far gone to find her way back, I am here to tell you, it is never too late. Starting over in my 60s was terrifying, but staying would have killed me. Maybe not physically, but spiritually, emotionally. Peace by aching peace. It took me years to learn that peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the presence of truth. And once I let that truth breathe, everything changed. Yes, it cost me. Yes, I lost people. But I found me again, and I promise you, there is no substitute for that kind of freedom. If you're afraid of what will happen when you speak up, I want you to ask yourself this. What is happening to you because you're staying silent? Are you sleeping at night? Do you recognize the woman in the mirror? Are you living, truly living, or just surviving? You deserve more than survival. You deserve joy, peace, wholeness, and you don't need anyone's permission to begin your healing. You might be thinking, but my story isn't as dramatic as yours. It doesn't matter. Pain is pain. And you don't need to justify your suffering to anyone in order to break free from it. Or maybe you're thinking, but I still love him. That's okay too. Love doesn't mean excusing betrayal. It doesn't mean staying silent to keep the illusion of unity. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for both of you is to tell the truth. And if you have children, I know how heavy this burden feels. I know you want to protect them. But truthfully, our silence doesn't protect our children. It confuses them. It teaches them that love is supposed to hurt, that secrets are safer than honesty, that endurance is more important than integrity. We can break that cycle. You can break that cycle. It starts with one brave moment, one decision to say no more, one breath where you allow your voice to be heard after so many years of being quiet. You don't have to do it all at once. Start by writing it down. Say it out loud in a whisper to yourself. Tell a friend, a counselor, your adult daughter, your reflection in the mirror. But speak, because truth is what heals. Not time, not silence, truth. And if no one else has told you this today, I am proud of you. I don't care how messy your story is. I don't care how long you've waited to tell it. The fact that you're still standing, still breathing, still searching for light, that is strength. From one grandmother to another, from one woman to another. You are worthy of a life where you don't have to lie to protect someone who broke you. If my story touched you in any way, please don't keep it to yourself. Like, comment, and share this video with someone who needs to hear they're not alone. Subscribe for more real-life stories of courage and truth from women who've lived through the unthinkable and found their voice again. And tell me, what truth are you ready to speak today?